Let us talk about if and else statement in Python today. In Python, we can create if statement using the keyword if. This is a keyword we use to create the if statement. If will take the condition. In order to create the if statement, we need to use this keyword if followed by the condition. It will always take the Boolean expression. So either it is true or false. Let's go with true. And then it ends with colon. In Python, if there is a statement which is ending with colon, it requires a block. In other programming languages, we might have seen curly brackets to define the scope in the code. But in Python, instead of curly brackets, we use colon. So, if there is a statement that is ending with colon, similar to other programming languages, we need to define the block which belongs to that condition. To indent the code, we need to provide the spaces. The block is mandatory. If we don't specify the block, we will get the indentation error. Okay, to indent the block, we can use as many spaces as we need. Let's say I will just use one space here. Now we will not get any error. The code gets executed as expected. One thing to make sure in this block, the number of spaces that we use for the first line should match for every other line inside the block. So the number of spaces that we are using should be consistent across this block. Let's say we are creating another print statement inside the same block, but this time we are using two spaces. In the first line we have used one space, and in the second line we are using two spaces. This is not accepted. We get the indentation error. So we need to indent each and every line of the block with the same number of spaces. If we are using one space or two spaces for the first line inside the block, then we will have to use the same number of spaces across the block. If there are 10 lines of code inside the block, all these 10 lines of code should have the same number of spaces. Otherwise, we will get the indentation error. So just make sure that every line inside the block has the same number of spaces. So either we can remove one space for the second line, or we can give one space for the first line. Let me just give one space for the first line and then execute the code. This time we see the code is getting executed. This is how we need to indent the code. So for every statement there must be a block. If there is no block, then we will get the indentation error. For some reason, if we want to create the statement but we don't want to have the block, then we can use the placeholder keyword, which is pass. So we don't get the error this time. So now in if statements, we use the keyword if and then we use a condition. If the condition is true, then the block will get executed. If the condition is false, then the block will not be executed. If I execute the code, we see that our print statement is getting executed because our condition is true. Instead of true, if we go with false and execute the code, we see the code is not getting executed. So for the block to be executed, the condition should be true. If the condition is true, then respective block will be executed. If the condition is false, then the block will not be executed. So we don't always use these Boolean expressions. We can also go with comparison operators. Let's say we have two variables. Now we wanted to check if b is greater than a or not. So we can use a comparison operator b greater than a and then execute the code. Now we see that if block is getting executed. That is because Python first evaluates this condition and it gets the Boolean expression whether true or false. Based on that result, the if block will be executed. If this condition is returning true, then this if block will be executed. If this condition is returning false, then if block will not be executed. What is b greater than a? It returns true, which is why the block of if condition is getting executed. If we make changes, b lesser than a, now this time it will return false. That is because b is not lesser than a, b is greater than a. If we execute the code, the block is not being executed. That is because the expression of this condition is false. So if it is false, then if block will not be executed. For if block to be executed, the condition should always return true. Let me just modify once again. Now I will print this just to see what is the results of this, so we will understand it. We can see the result of this condition is true. That is why the block is being executed. This is the if statement. We can also have else statement. So if statement will be executed, mean if block will be executed if the condition is true. Now we can have else statement. Now else block will be executed when if block is not executed. Only one statement will be executed, either if block or else block. In case if block is being executed, then else block will be ignored. In case if block is not being executed, then else block will be executed. When we execute this code, now else block is not executed because if block is being executed. Let us change this statement. Now b lesser than a will return false. So if block will not be executed, which is why when we execute the code, else block is executed. So when we write if and else conditions, either if block will be executed or else block will be executed. So in this case, we are only having one condition. The condition is b lesser than a. But if we wanted to have multiple conditions, then we can use elif. We can mention elif. Elif, here we have if statement, elif statement, and then finally we have else. So first it will check the if statement. If it is true, then the block will be executed and all other conditions will be ignored. In case if statement is not true, then it will ignore that. It will move on to the next condition. The next condition is elif. If elif is true, then the elif block will be executed and the rest of the code will be ignored. In case even elif statement is not true, it will continue to the next condition. If there are multiple conditions, it will continue to the last statement. If none of the statement is true, then finally else block will be executed. If any of the condition is true and then the block is executed, then the rest of code will be ignored. So when we execute this code, we see the elif statement is executed. If block is not executed and else block is not executed. So at any moment, only one block will be executed in these conditions. So this is one thing to remember, that only one block will be executed. All other blocks will be ignored. Here we have multiple conditions. Our code will check each and every conditions. Wherever the condition is true, that block of code will be executed. Rest of the code will be ignored. Initially we have the if statement. If this condition is true, then this block will be executed. The rest of the code will be ignored. If this is false, then it will move on to the next condition. In the same way, it will check each and every condition until the condition is true. Ultimately, if none of the condition is true, then the else block will be executed. This else block is optional. We can have it or we can remove it. But this is always a good idea to have the else block, so that if none of our condition is true, then we will execute the else block. So when we execute this code, we see still the second condition is true, which is why all other conditions including else block is ignored. We can also check multiple conditions in one if statement. Let's see how we can do that. A lesser than or equals to 20 or b greater than 15 condition is true. Okay, so when we execute the code, the block of code is being executed. That is because both the conditions are true. We are checking two conditions here and we are using logical operator, which is OR, which means if any of the condition is true, then we need to execute this code. Let's say I will make it false. So now A is either lesser than or equals to 20. Yes, it is true. But B is not greater than 28. It is false. Since we are using OR operator, first it will check the first condition, whether it is true or not. If it is false, then only it will go to the next condition. Since it is true, it will not check the second condition. Directly it will go ahead and execute the code. We see the code is executed. If the first condition is false, so now the first condition is false. A is not lesser than or equals to 6. A is actually 10. So since the first condition is false, it will go ahead and check the second condition. When it checks the second condition is true. Since it is true, the block of code will be executed. Let me execute the code. We can see the block of code is executed. Now, if both of them are false, then the block of code will not be executed. else block is executed. Or we can also use AND operator. Now when we use AND, both the conditions should be true. So if block will be executed only when both the conditions are true. Both the conditions are false, which is why else block is executed. If we make one condition true, let's say I will make it true, it is lesser than or equals to 10. Yes, it is. So now this condition is true, but this condition is false. So if we execute the code, still if block is not executed because AND operator makes sure that both the conditions should be true. If block will be executed only when both the conditions are true. Now let me make the second condition also true. We see if block is executed because these two conditions are true. This is how we can write if and else statements. That's all for today. See you in the next video. Thank you.